everyone. I'm Rachel, here with Ari, and we're your hosts for the My Writer podcast. This week, we're on episode 228, asking our guest, what are some tips to manage writer's block? Before we dive into the topic, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening if you haven't already. And if you enjoy the show, please share it with friends and feel free to write a review.
Now, please help us welcome Cory Rowe to the show. Thank you so much for joining us. It is always great to have new guests on our podcast.
No worries. I'm excited to be here.
You say that now. Wait till the end. Okay, before we go further and start talking about the actual issue, would you like to tell everyone why you chose to discuss writer's block as a topic?
Absolutely. I feel every writer experiences writer's block, no matter their experience level. And some writers don't know why it happens or how to get out of it. So I would like to dive deep into that and help writers move along with their story.
I think that's great. I mean, writer's block is such I'm going to steal Ari's word here from before we started recording. It's a universal issue, topic, whatever you want to call it. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. But before we actually deep dive into getting over and managing writer's block, just for transparency's sake, Cory, what exactly is writer's block?
Writer's block is the condition of being unable to think about what to write or how to proceed with your writing or story. It's that simple. It's really
I was
that
just
simple.
gonna say, I love the short and sweet definition, because writer's block, I feel like when people think of writer's block, they kind of overthink what it is, ironically enough, but it really is just that simple. There are going to be some days where you just don't know how to proceed with your story and you don't know what to write. And some days are easier to get over it than others.
Oh, absolutely. And it hits every writer, no matter what. And you can be a very experienced writer who has 100 novels out or 100 screenplays, and you still experience this. So you still experience the moment of looking at the blank page going, what happens next?
I have to admit, I like your definition. Nice, clean, clear, precise. Because I have seen people say oh, writer's block is only when you don't even know what story to write. And it's like, that can be part of writer's block, but that's not all. It's like you can be in the middle of a story, even with an outline, you can still get stuck because of different reasons. And yeah, I think that there's some people who claim that there is no writer's block. And then there's other people who claim, well, you can only get writer's block in this part of your process. And I think it's one of those topics that lots of people are divided on.
I agree that there's a lot of division with it because a lot of people assume writer's block is you being lazy or that you're just not focused. It's none of that. Writer's block happens because you are trying to progress a story, you're trying to start a story, you're trying to think or feel what to write next, and nothing's coming to you. And that right there is very detrimental to the writing process, but it happens to every single writer. It's happened to me a million times. There's no certain part in the story where writer's block happens. It happens at any point in the story. It can happen at the end, beginning, middle, before you start, and then even during the editing process. You'll get notes, and then you're like, okay, how do I fix this? And you have to think about it. You get writer's block then, and it just happens.
That is such a good point. One of my manuscripts, I was struggling with it for ages, and I realized that I had a block in one area, and I was it was like trying to put a square peg in a round hole. Your brain's saying, no, that's not going to fit. And it was just like, no, it's got to go. Yeah, that's it. It's got to go. And it was just this constant repeating of the same pointless action. And it took getting past that point to go, oh, the whole thing has got to come out. Rather than trying to fix it, it just had to get cut completely. With that in mind, we're going to nip to our next question. So what causes writer's block?
There's a lot of things that cause writer's block. Lack of inspiration, illness, mental conditions, depression, financial pressure, a sense of failure. You don't have family or friends that support you. You have to work your day job and you're not sure when you can write. And so there's all these things that kind of cause writer's block. And, I have ADHD, right? And so sometimes I get distracted, and distraction is a huge thing. And a lot of people are like, oh, just turn off your internet and just write, or put your phone away, don't look at it. And a lot of these things can help, but sometimes they don't. And because there's times where I'm writing and I have to look something up. I have to like, okay, what's a better word for this? I don't have a thesaurus handy. I mean, we live in a digital age. I have to look it up. So turn my internet back on, look it up, turn it back off. No, that's too much time and too much brain power. What I do is I face a wall so I don't see anything around me, and I look at my screen, and I sit there with intention to write. With the ADHD part, it gets a little harder. Lack of inspiration happens because you have been working on the story for so long. You're like, I don't know what to do next, right? I don't know what happens next. Depression is a huge one too, because you're feeling down about your writing. You're feeling down about your skills, and are you a good writer? Are you good enough to do what you do? And that can cause writer's block because you start questioning everything about your story, about you as a writer. And I've seen that happen even with myself.
Yeah, that I have to say, like depression, because that is a crippling condition anyway. Just like it depends on the level you can have. Functioning as a human being can become so difficult that even something as enjoyable as writing, and let's be honest, we love writing, but that doesn't mean it's easy, and it doesn't mean it's always enjoyable. It's like the best thing, flowers and rainbows, like yes, it's the brilliant, I love it all the time. It's like, no, you can love your favorite meal, but some days it's going to be like, oh, I'm so sick of eating this. I find, especially with things like if you have a condition or if you have a lack of inspiration, and you said it, like you start thinking, am I a good enough writer? And it's like a cycle, and you get stuck. I'm like, oh, obviously I'm not. Look how crap it is. I can't even get past this page. Oh, well, I must be rubbish. Well, no one's going to read it. And it's this horrible cycle that just doesn't end. And you have to break that to even try and get out of the writer's block. And oh, that has always been my biggest hurdle. Just really bad, negative self-doubt all the time, just telling myself how bad I am.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I experienced it. I experienced that just this month. I'm like, am I a good enough writer? But the thing is like, I know I am, because when people read my work, they're affected emotionally. That's how I know. So I'm okay admitting, like I've been writing screenplays for 25 years, and I still feel like, am I a good enough writer? It just happens. For me, it's just like a confidence thing, like have the confidence that that you are going to mess up.
Well, it's like the imposter syndrome too. I mean, you have that constant feeling that you're not good enough, and then you start questioning, why did I start writing in the first place? And if you've been working on your current project for so long, you're like, oh, I'm never going to finish this. That person in Timbuktu started their novel 2 months ago and they already have a publication date and yada, yada, yada. And it's so easy to put yourself down. And speaking as someone with many mental illnesses taking residence in my brain, it's so difficult to find a good writing routine to help yourself get over that writer's block. And I think that in itself can cause writer's block, because you listen to what other people say and they'll say, oh, I have ADHD and this is what works for me. So you're like, oh, I have ADHD too. So maybe I'll try that and see if that works. And when it doesn't, you get put down because you're like, why didn't that work for me? And then the cycle continues and you're just stuck in this loop, and you just go on and you continue to have that writer's block because you're constantly trying to search out ways not to have writer's block. Does that make any sense?
That makes total sense, because another thing I've done to try and kind of block out writer's block is my office setup correct? I rearrange, and see if that helps. And most of the time it really doesn't, because you are not taking accountability to sit down and write. You are pushing it aside and waiting for an opportunity when inspiration hits. But well, I know we're going to discuss some of that in a little bit later, but you don't have to always be inspired to write. You just have to write. There's probably chefs out there that cook but aren't inspired to cook all the time, but guess what? They still have to. They still do their job. And writers have a job. Writers write.
That is exactly it.
I
That
was
is
just
it.
gonna say, yeah.
I think it's because like you have a job, don't you? If you have a job outside of writing, it's like who feels inspired to go to their job every day? But you kind of do. You get there, you sit down, you get your cup of coffee, your cup of tea, you have a chat with someone, and then you put yourself into it, you get it done, and then you have another chat because you need to get away from your desk.
And writing is lonesome, right? Writing is lonesome a lot. And a lot of times you just want to talk to someone, right? You just want to have someone to bounce ideas off. Another thing that causes writer's block, in my opinion, is other people's opinions. It kind of makes you feel like, well, I'm not doing this right. So I don't know how to fix this. I don't know what to do. It's like, okay, I'm going to scrap this whole thing, or scrap this chapter, scrap this scene, and start over. But then you're like, where do I start? Other people's opinions and judgments also cause writer's block.
Well, that's the thing. You can't please everybody, but we would all like to please everybody. So there's like that fine line where you need to decide whose opinions help the story and whose don't, and ultimately what you want to do for your story. Because you do need to treat writing as a job and as a business, especially if you want to make any sort of income from it. But there's also that it gets to a point where you just need to write the story that you want to tell. And if you have readers reading it, great. And if there are some readers that don't care for it, then oh well, it wasn't the right story for them.
Yeah, it's just like movies. Not everybody likes horror movies or romantic comedies, right? There's specific audiences who that's for. And when you find someone to read your work, you want to find someone who enjoys that genre, right? So if you're writing mystery, you want to find people who enjoy mysteries, not people who enjoy, smut. You know, it just doesn't always calculate to the feedback that you're wanting to get.
Right, absolutely. Basically, pretty much anything and everything can cause writer's block, and you just kind of need to take things day by day. But what are some symptoms of writer's block to help you kind of realize, oh no, I'm getting stuck in this cycle again?
No motivation is a big one. You don't find the motivation to continue writing. You rather turn on your TV and watch or binge whatever you can, and hoping that maybe something will strike you. So you have less ambition. You find less joy in it. You're starting to feel like it's just like a typical 9 to 5, and you're not able to, feel like it's enjoyable anymore. So some people just stop. You feel less creative because you feel like you're stuck and you're like, I'm a creative. I should get out of this. Why can't I get out of this? And you kind of you become your own worst enemy with that. And also a sense of failing. You feel like you're failing yourself, your story, your audience, your readers. You feel a sense of failure with that because, like I said, when you're a creative and you're a writer and you're trying to get past a certain point in your story, trying to start a story, trying to finish a story, wherever you're at, even with character development, it's like, okay, I don't know how I want this character to be, right? And you're a creative, you feel this sense of like, I should know what I'm doing because I'm writing this story. Why don't I know what's going on? And so a symptom of that is a sense of feeling like a failure.
You bring up some good points because I feel like, especially when it comes to writing or anything creative, just art in general, I feel like a lot of people assume it's meant to be easy, come naturally because we have a passion for it. So when it doesn't and that writer's block really hits, I think it kind of trips people up. And we're like, oh, am I getting writer's block? What is this? I don't know what this is. I thought I had a passion for writing, so why don't I want to write? Why am I feeling stuck? Thus, you kind of go down this spiral, and then the writer's block, which I think it kind of strengthens the writer's block in a way.
It does. It does, because then you start feeling other symptoms. Like at that point, you're like, okay, I'm not motivated anymore to write. And so you have less ambition for it and you find less joy in it. Like some of these symptoms already talked about. you go down a spiral and you feel, like I said, a sense of failing. When does the spiral stop? Right. And one of my favorite sayings is when you hit rock bottom, the only way you can look is up. Right. So when you feel like there's nowhere to turn with writer's block, you hit rock bottom, look up. And there's things that I'll discuss, like exercises that you can do to help you get to the next level, to get to that point of, okay, this is what happens next. This is how I want the character to be. This is the dialogue I want to be said. To me, writer's block is like hitting rock bottom.
I really like that quote. I'm going to use that for
I
many
just-
other things, not just writer's block.
I thought that was like, she's going to be stealing that. Good idea.
That's
Actually,
okay.
Rachel, you said something, like you said, like Cory, you said you feel less creative and you start having less ambition and, you know, you're less joy. And then you said, Rachel, like, because it should be a passion, it should be easy, but it isn't always. I have to admit, I've actually seen on social media, another reason I don't spend too much time on social media, I have seen people say, like, I am struggling with writer's block, or I am not finding joy in my writing, music, whatever it is that they're creative. And I've seen comments with, well, then obviously it's not meant for you. It's like, you're not a real writer if you're struggling, because if you love it, you will just do it. You will find a way, blah, blah, blah. And I think that's a very unhelpful thing. And I think the problem is we come to social media because, as you said, it's a very, you know, it's a very isolating career or hobby, depending on which way you want to do it. And so we try and create a community online. And I think years ago it was easier. Now it's a lot of just angry people in the comments saying horrible things. And I think that would add to your feeling less motivation and feeling less joy, because then all those voices in your head saying like, oh, wow, maybe I'm not supposed to be a writer because I am struggling. And everyone's going, oh, yeah, well, you should be. It's so easy. If you can't do it, then it's not your passion. It's like, you just need to write. I found that, and I think that's very, very distressing.
It's toxic. That's toxic behavior. That is coming from people who chase dreams and haven't had their dreams come true. That's coming from people who tried writing and they can't make it. It's a discipline, right? If I were to start doing karate, you go through white belt and so forth all the way up to black belt, right? So if I'm a white belt and I'm struggling, does that mean I'm not meant for karate? No, it just means I have to work harder. And usually where that comes from is working harder on yourself, not on the story. When you're struggling with that, it's inward, not outward. It's always inward, right? It's always what's inside. It does go from inward to outward, because then you start physically laying down, getting depressed, right? Just because you're struggling at something doesn't mean you're not meant for it. Another favorite quote of mine is from the movie Sister Act 2. Whoopi Goldberg goes up to Lauryn Hill and hands her a book and says, if you wake up and the only thing you could think about is singing, you're meant to be a singer. So if you wake up and you think about your story, you think about writing, you think about all that, you're meant to be a writer. There are struggles with everything creative. I'm sure Da Vinci and Michelangelo and Plato and Socrates and all these philosophers and creatives and people of our culture had struggles with what they were passionate about, but it's what made them better. So writer's block, if you get past it, guess what? That's just a barrier you got over. And you climb that wall and you go up that mountain. And once you're past it, you feel this sense of accomplishment and joy. And you think to yourself, like, oh my gosh, why didn't I have to think about that earlier? Like, that was just so easy. But these people who are commenting these negative comments about, well, you're not meant to be a writer if you're having this hard of a time. It's not like that. You struggle because you care. You care about your creative process. You care about what you're creating. Struggle just means that you are advancing your skill set once you get past it. Sorry, I can go on a tangent about negative comments. So
No, I was just going to say this conversation has gone way deeper than I ever imagined, and I am here for it. Oh my gosh, I could listen to you quote all day, not going to lie.
mhm.
Because seriously, I mean, everything you're saying is true. And I saw something. I I apologize. I can't remember who the artist was or what the comic was, but it was like they were like little animal friends, and there was like a brick wall, and some of the birds were flying over it. And then there was one bird that just couldn't fly high enough. And it was like, oh man, like I can't, I'm struggling. I need help. And then like another animal came by and was like, that wall might be there to let you lean on it for a few minutes. So when you mentioned about how writer's block is just a barrier, and once you climb over that wall, you have such a great feelings of accomplishment and you're proud of yourself. But also I feel like writer's block is just telling you, slow down your mind and take a break, because you write for 5 hours a day every day and you don't give yourself enough time to just relax and not think about it for a little bit. Like, give yourself some space and give yourself some self-care and so on and so forth. And I think that's really important too, because it goes along with something else that you just said, that I can't remember what you just said. I can't remember how you
It's
just
okay.
worded it.
It's okay.
But your struggles are you advancing, and it's just, it all kind of, it works together. When you have writer's block, you need to focus on yourself more than the story. That's what you said, something
Yes.
along those
Yes.
lines.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's inward. It's inward.
Yes. Yeah. That's such an interesting way of looking at it, man.
Because it's your mind playing tricks on you. That's all it is.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
I have to say, I'm going to bounce around a bit because I was like, I've got to make notes because you've said something. I want to say that. When you said like it's for a sense of achievement, I actually find that is so true. Like if you hit writer's block, it's like if you're on a marathon, says me who's never run a marathon, and you hit the wall, and it's like getting past that and getting to the finish line is supposedly this massive, like, wow, I did that. Same with writer's block. If you hit writer's block and then overcome it, that has got to feel so incredible compared to if you have no writer's block for that novel and you just like, everything's going brilliantly and it works. I'm not saying that's not still a big accomplishment. Writing a novel is always an accomplishment. Obviously, when you're in writer's block, it's not as enjoyable. You can't even appreciate that it's a struggle and you'll eventually get through it. You just feel like you're sinking in mud. That's what it feels like. You're sinking in mud and you can't get out, and there's no way of getting out and you're stuck. But obviously, once you're past it and you look back, you think, wow, okay, I actually overcame that issue. I climbed that mountain. And we have this stupid thing in our head like, oh, it's so difficult. Yeah, you know what was difficult? Talking, walking. And yet we do it now. It's this thing where it's like, oh, it's so hard. It's like, yeah, if you've never ridden a bike, riding a bike is hard right up until you learn to ride the bike, and then it becomes really easy. And you can't fully remember how hard it was when you didn't know how to ride a bike. And it's the same thing. It's like once you're past it, it's just great.
But what's great about once you figure out how to ride a bike, you experience joy, you experience accomplishment. How many movies and stories are out there about someone who's struggling that overcame it? We go and see these movies, we read these stories, right? Inside, we know how that feels. We know how it feels to have struggles and not overcome them. And we want that inspiration, right? There's movies I've watched where someone overcame something. I was like, man, now I feel motivated to go do something. So writer's block is just that struggle. And these people who are saying negative things and trying to put you down or trying to put you back in quote unquote reality. Reality is you're a writer, right? It's gonna be hard. It's gonna be tricky. It's gonna be uncomfortable, but it's gonna be worth it.
Well, that's it. I mean, there are authors like from years ago who wrote books and then stopped writing for like 10, 20 years and then started again. It doesn't matter how long it takes or how many pauses there are, or if you hit writer's block for however long it takes. If the story is still there and it's still bubbling away and you still want to tell it, I think that's quite important. I am just going to whiz one thing because I totally forgot. You mentioned how you could feel less creative. I can usually tell if I have writer's block when I am stuck in a story and then I go, oh, I've got an idea. And I'm literally recycling my own ideas from another story of mine. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I can't use that. I've already used that. It's like I'm literally stuck in this like following the same pattern of like, yeah, I already tried that with that one. And it works better in that novel. So I don't really want to rip it out and put it in this one. Oh, and that's when I usually can tell that I've messed up and I'm stuck in writer's block, when I'm plagiarizing myself. That's what it is.
I think that's also your comfort zone. You get stuck in your own comfort zone and you do something you've done before that worked and you're hoping it works again. But guess what? That's not the solution. That's not the solution. The solution is something that pushes the current story forward, not worked in a previous story.
That makes sense. That's probably why I spend a lot of time bouncing between too many stories. But
I was just gonna say, I'm getting called out here.
seriously, seriously.
It happens to me. I do that too. There's times where I took something from my own like another story I wrote and I put it in this note. I'm like, wait a minute, this sounds familiar. Okay, I can't do that because I already did that in this one. And
But
so,
it's genius. So let's
It
do it
is.
again.
Absolutely.
It's the fact we don't always recognize it straight away. It's not like we're purposely going and taking it. It's like, oh yes, I've got this great twist. And they're like, as you said, oh, that sounds really familiar. Oh yeah, it's from that story over there. Oh, it's not great. Not great. With that, we're gonna segue into our next question. Are there different types of writer's block that people can suffer from?
Absolutely. Fear of exposure. Exposure is people reading your story and you're afraid of what they'll think. So you try to think of ways that will please them, your audience, your readers, and not yourself. Perfectionism is another one. That's huge. I'm bad at that. I am so bad at perfectionism. There's times where I'm trying to write a first draft and it took me a year to write a first draft because I'm trying to make my first draft perfect. Because a lot of people feel like, oh, if I just write it out, I'm wasting my time. But in reality, you're not. You're not wasting your time. You're writing. It may not be what you originally want or something that you feel is not right. And you just move forward a little bit. And sometimes it's hard to do because you want your story to be perfect. Like going back to that chef analogy, right? We watch these competitions, right? These reality TV shows about cooking and baking, right? They want it to be perfect. People are judging that. But when it comes to writing, it's a completely different ballgame. We don't judge that. We want to experience something. We want to feel something. We want to be able to connect with the character. And perfectionism comes because you want it to be perfect for your reader. Not for you, but for your reader. If you have a day job, problems at work, or problems at home, that happens. You feel like you have no ideas or can't get in the zone, or like me, ADHD, getting distracted. This is not a complete list. The list goes on. I'm just naming a few. I think what people experience when it comes to writer's block is unique. It's never the same, but overcoming it usually, like some of these exercises we'll talk about, usually do help overcome writer's block.
I mean, perfectionism, I will hold my hand up. That is the demon on my back. Yeah, there we go. We're all holding our hands up. I think it's the fact that even when you know you're not meant to, even when you intellectually know that you shouldn't do it, you can't help but look at your first draft and then look at some finished book that you know has been edited to death and had a professional editor and has been like polished perfectly, and you're still going, oh wow, mine's nothing like that. It's like, no, it's not meant to be, and we know it's not meant to be, but we can't help ourselves because it's just like, no, it has to be, there's still errors. It's like, yeah, it's a first draft, there can be errors, and the whole point is you're just getting the bare bones down. But I cannot do that. My bare bones have always got meat and flesh and hair on them. It's like, no, the whole thing needs to be ready, and then it's a first draft.
So I get like that sometimes too, and I have to stop myself. So one of the things I learned is with fear of exposure and perfectionism, never send your story to people you care about, because you hold their opinions so high and you're worried that they're not going to like it. You're worried that they're going to give you notes and they're going to think differently of you. I always find people who are like, for me, I write screenplays. So I don't find other screenwriters. I find actors, because screenwriters will say, oh, you're formatting your structure, right? But actors read it and feel the emotion. I get feedback from people, not that I've worked with, not just that, but I've sent like a short story to them, or like a short film to them, right? It's to some people, and I get their feedback and I get constructive feedback. I want to save that person's information and be like, hey, I got something else I'm working on. Can I have you read it? Because you were honest with me with this before, and they told me this is what I liked, this is what I didn't like, this is what's confusing, this is what was great, and a piece of advice is never send it to anyone you care about, because you're going to get hurt no matter what. Because if they tell you they like it, you don't believe them, because they just care about you. They tell you that they don't like it, now you're hurt because you thought that they cared about you. So you can't have people you care about read your work, because it is biased, and they're very much just trying to protect you.
Send it to your enemies. Got it. Perfect. I'll do that.
Yep.
I think I used to be part of a locals writers group a few years ago, and I think that's actually what really helped me get over the fear of exposure, and also a little bit of the perfectionism. The perfectionism never truly goes away, but I digress. And my sister was part of that group because she is also a writer, and I think we used to always read each other's work and comment on it like highly positively, as you just said. I mean, we care about each other, we want to boost each other up. And after joining the local writers group, we became friends with everybody in the writers group, but we still knew that fine line between being friends and being fellow writers with constructive criticism. And we found a good balance, and it definitely helps if you surround yourself with those type of people that they appreciate your work as a writer, but they also know the importance of that feedback, whether it's positive or negative, but done in a nice way, of course.
Yeah, and thing is relationships are first, and reading and writing is second, right? So if I were to send it to any of my siblings, they're not going to tell me, oh, this part was confusing or this was awful. No, they're going to be like, oh, this was great, right? To spare me. And so you got lucky with that. And with that writers group. And I suggest everybody and anybody who's a writer to get into a local group, but be wary of the person who is the know-it-all. Because as soon as you get someone who is a know-it-all and be like, oh, this is like this, or if someone tells you like how you should do your story, then that's also not great. So you got to be careful with your beta readers and who you send it out to. And I'll be honest, I have one guy who read my script and said nothing but negative things, right? And I was like, you know what, this doesn't make any sense, because 9 other people like it. He just wanted to be a know-it-all, wanted to get looked at as a master of the craft, and it just made him look worse. And then I found out he fed it through AI, and I'm like, you did great notes on that. Way to go, buddy. So, but yeah,
Oh
so
my
you got to be
gosh.
careful with that.
You're absolutely right, because there always will be that one person. Because the moment you said be careful of the know-it-all, I immediately thought of one particular person in that writers group who ended up getting kicked out of the group by the host because he was such a know-it-all. And he did actually take the chapter I submitted and he rewrote it and then submitted it back to me. And I was like, that's a lot. You've crossed a line, and that's no. So yeah, I can get behind that one. Definitely be careful of the know-it-all, but also just surround yourself with good people. And I think that's part of the reason why I started sharing my writing online, is because I was like, I don't know any of you people. So if you don't like my writing, I will never have to face you in person. So there's no need for me to be embarrassed. And if you do like my writing, well, then that's kind of a win for me. And if you're just indifferent about my writing, well, then that's fine, but you still took the time to read it. So that's also kind of a win.
Writing is like any other art. It's meant to be shared with the world. And if that's your way of sharing it and trying to figure out what your writing makes sense. But another thing that with that perfectionism is validation. And validation is, am I a good writer? Right. And that creates writer's block too, because you seek out validation just to make sure what you're doing is good. Right. I've done it. If any writer has ever said they've never done it, they're lying, because every writer has sent something to someone just for validation purposes. And that's okay at the beginning. But as you start moving on and you get writer's block, you don't need validation if you're good. If what you're trying to present is makes you feel like Stephen King, or the next, major published novel or screenplay, you need to seek inward validation by knowing that you are good, and that writer's block happens, and that when you do face writer's block, you can go past that barrier, go past that hurdle. Why? Because at some point, when we talk about these exercises, you're going to realize, oh, I did this, and I know I'm a good writer because I know how to tell a story, get the readers and people emotionally involved. Because the thing about writing is you want your reader to turn a page.
I just want to circle back to something you said that really hit me, because obviously you're a script writer, and you said you didn't send it to other screenwriters, you sent it to actors. And that is so important. I wouldn't have even thought of that if I was doing screenwriting. I wouldn't think, oh yeah, send it to an actor, someone who's going to be reading it anyway and will know whether it flows right, whether there's the emotion and the mood and the tone is all there. And I think that's sometimes what we make a mistake with when we're novel writers. We go to other writers, and obviously that is important. That's what whole critique partner is about. It's some other writer with a skill either similar to yours or higher than yours looks over your work and gives you constructive criticism. But we still need readers. And while I appreciate that writers and readers, lots of writers and readers, it's the best way to be. However, it's really important, I think, to have just some readers. I have a few people in my life who are just readers, they're not writers. And I know that my manuscripts are going to be going through those people because they're readers. And I need a reader's point of view, not a writer who can't take the writer hat off and is just constantly nitpicking the things that's I can fix that eventually because I know that. I need to know how a reader feels. And it's when you said that about the actor, it's yeah, it's so important, especially that, to find someone who would read it in a totally different way than another writer. That is so important.
Because other writers like to critique other writing, right? And they enjoy going through it and marking up notes because it makes them feel accomplished as a mentor or as a writer, right? It's oh, I know what I'm doing, right? As a screenwriter, I've sent my screenplays to companies that give notes back, and then they tell me suggestions on oh, you should do this in this scene, and I'm that you're not the writer. I am. Don't tell me how to write my story. Tell me, is it working? And so honestly, I stopped sending it to those companies because they're all about format and structure and all those other things. And it's all formulas with that. And I'm not a formulaic writer. I like to write a story because guess what? I like to tell the human experience, whether it be a character that's a dog or a character that is flawed. It's all about the human experience.
And I think that's awesome. It's kind of similar to social media, like Instagram, for example. I've seen a lot of people come to realize that when you use hashtags, you're using the same hashtags that other writers are using. So other writers are looking at those hashtags and you're just attracting other writers to your work, not where you want to be attracting readers. You want people to read it and get exposure that way, but you're just attracting other writers. And it's you go in this cycle. It's a tough line. And once you find it, you need to kind of figure out how to cross it in the best way for you. So, kind of with that said, what are some exercises you can do to manage your writer's block?
One of my favorite exercises is figuring out what won't happen next, right? So you sit there and you go, okay, this wouldn't happen, this wouldn't happen, but then something can strike you. You're like, oh, wait, because that wouldn't happen, maybe this will happen. And you start to really kind of start tinkering with it. And you go through this process of elimination. I love doing that because it's like, okay, my character won't go to the grocery store. Okay, my character won't go to the gas station. Maybe that could work because maybe instead of them driving past it, they stop at it. Okay, now this gas station attendant's a new character. How can that push the story forward? Because a lot of people with writer's block try to figure out what will happen next, but if you try to figure out what won't happen next, can push you past that barrier. And I suggest you don't type it. You grab a pen and paper, use your whiteboard, whatever, and you write it down. You write it longhand because that forces you to think longer. It takes longer to write something than to type something. Another thing is people have issues with screens, right? If you're looking at a screen all day, you don't want to go home and look at a screen. Pen and paper. I bought a typewriter because sometimes I don't like looking at a screen, so I'll just type it. And I like hearing the clicks and sounds of a typewriter. And it allows you to focus, but not focus so much on the screen, but on the story, on the actual physical page. Another thing is what's called morning pages. I'm sure we all heard of that, where you just first thing in the morning, you write down 3 pages of free writing, doesn't matter what it is, right? The Pomodoro technique works. I'm sure you've all heard of that. 25 minutes and take a break, 25 minutes, but it doesn't have to be 25 minutes, it could be 5 minutes. And what people don't realize is research is writing. If you want to take 5 minutes of research, take a 5-minute break to think about it, go back, do 5 more minutes of research, but you're doing it for the story, right? And so that can help writer's block is further research. Organize your thoughts visually, like putting all the Post-its on the wall, index cards, string, get a cork board, whiteboard. I use a whiteboard and I'll write down what happens next. And because what will happen is when I'm not writing, let's say I'm going from the bedroom to the kitchen to make dinner, I'll see that. And then I'll be like, okay, what does happen next? Or what doesn't happen next? It gives you that note to be like, okay, let's think about it when we're not thinking about it. When we're sitting down trying to write, sometimes it doesn't happen. But sometimes later when you're doing something else, something may come to you. Sometimes in the shower, sometimes the idea comes in the shower. You don't want to forget it. I have what's called Aqua Notes, and it's waterproof paper.
I have that too. Yeah, I have Aqua Notes.
Yep. A change of scenery. What people don't realize is you can book a study room at the library for free. Go there. I can't do coffee shops because my ADHD just gets me. I'm just pinging everyone. I'm like seeing everything and I can't concentrate. So sometimes that doesn't work for people. And so the library is a good option because it's quiet and there's no one there to bother you. There's no one there saying, chai latte, whatever, right? It allows you to be with yourself. And sometimes going to a hotel room or going to a different city, to a small town, just doing something different, change your scenery. Writing prompts are fun. I look those up online and I just start writing and exercise my mind. And exercise is also important, staying, you don't have to be in shape, but going for a walk, for a mile, going to the gym. Another good one is body doubling, right? Sitting with someone who's working on something else while you're writing, because if they're productive, you want to be productive. So there's the body doubling. That is a huge thing, especially for ADHDers. That is a huge thing. Stay hydrated. Water is important. Electrolytes are important. Have my water and it's always full, always. And when it's empty, I go and fill it. And another thing is just like rest, not just like sleeping or taking a nap or lounging. It's also like, okay, a rest break is stepping away from the computer, stepping away from the typewriter, filling up your water, grabbing a snack. That's a rest break. That's okay. It's okay to take those. A lot of people feel this sense of guilt when they are sitting there trying to figure this out and they can't. And so getting up and moving your legs. My smartwatch tells me when to stand up. And I stand and I move around and I get the blood flowing again. And you put your hands over your head, get more oxygen into your body. That helps. But let's say you're having an issue or a problem with dialogue, right? You don't know how this character, what to say next, right? Go to a coffee shop and listen to people talk. You know, one of my favorite movies is actually Barbie. You know, it's a great movie. But the scene where she's sitting on the bench and just looking at people, right? And experiencing life. That's what writers can do. Writers can go out and do that. Go to the park and just watch and listen. I mean, don't be weird about it. go out and go out and see the world, because that's what you're writing about. Think about the message you want, like the theme, the subtext, right? One of my greatest examples is a man gets fired from his job, right? He goes home and he notices his teenage son or teenage daughter is loading the dishwasher the way that he doesn't like it. And he gets upset and starts, I told you, this is how you do it. And he starts doing himself very angrily. Is he mad because the dishes aren't being done correctly? Or is he mad because he lost his job? So what's the subtext behind it? What is the actual emotion? What's being said that's not being said? And you can think about that, like, okay, what's the subtext of this scene? What's the subtext of this character saying? Because again, we all don't always say what we mean. We don't always express that through verbal dialogue. We express it through emotion. To figure out what the subtext is, you know, what time of day do you work best at? I do my best work in the morning. And so I get up at 4 and I write from 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. And then I do my day job. And if I feel more motivation at night, that's what I do. But that's me, because I know for me, that's my creative time. And that's when I feel my creative juices flowing, right? I was able to write a 6-page short script in 2 hours. I filmed it in February, and it's great. It's a really great film. And people connected with it. And it's because during that time, I was emotionally, mentally, and physically ready. And so finding the time of day that works best for you can help writer's block. Because if you're a night owl and that's your best time, stay up. If you get less sleep for a day or two, you get less sleep. It happens. We all lose sleep. But if you figure out what time of day you work best at, write during that time. That's important. Write during that time and figure out your routine during that time. You know, because everyone's like, oh, I get up, I get a cup of coffee or tea, go on the patio, watch the sunrise, you know, and that's cool if that's part of your routine. But if you go and sit down right afterwards and you can try to get past this hurdle, great. But if that doesn't work for you, then why are you doing it? Find something different. Find something different in your routine, because there's something there that's missing. There's many other exercises that you can probably look up and do, but this is primarily what I do.
I actually really appreciate the wide range that you explained to answer what exercises people can do to get over writer's block, because you're absolutely right with every single one of them. And might I just add that I am very happy to find another morning writer, because I do the same thing. I get up early and I get my writing done, because that's when I'm most creative as well. And it's also just more so quiet time. But yeah, like writing prompts are so fun. And also for me, I actually prefer writing in a coffee shop. I find that the chatter with everybody and the hustle and bustle of things going around me kind of acts like white noise. But I also go with my cousins and my sisters. So like the body doubling, as you mentioned, when one or all of them are being productive and I'm not, I like my competitiveness comes out and it actually helps me be a little more productive. Finally, you mentioned figure out what won't happen next in your story. I never really thought of that before, to kind of work backwards and like or analyze the scene that you just wrote or the chapter you just wrote and figure out, you know, the subtext underneath it. That's that's so interesting. So you can either, like, to help you get over writer's block, you can either like deep dive into what you've already written and think outside the box and work backwards. Or I really like how you said to get up, move around, hydrate, exercise, go for a walk, people watch, because your mind and your body work together, and you can't have one without the other. One needs to be like, they both need to be in tip-top shape for them to both work properly, is what I'm trying to say. That was good. That was a well-rounded answer. I really appreciate that.
No worries. And another thing you can do also with writer's block is if you're stuck here, write something that you know is going to happen later. Start writing that. And then like, okay, now this happened here. What happened before that? And then what happened before that? And then what happened before that? And I've done that before. And I've written a whole screenplay where I was like, I know a scene I want. And so I write the scene. And then I'm like, okay, what happened before this? And I go backwards and I wrote that. And I'm like, okay, now all this happened. Now I know how to finish it. And so when it comes to writer's block, the biggest thing to remember is that it happens to everyone. You're not alone. If you're a writer, you're a writer. We're writing a story because we care about it. We enjoy it. And another thing, like a piece of advice, is don't write for your readers, write for yourself. Because a lot of times people or writers will write for their particular audience, they hold back. And because they're holding back, they don't know what's right next. Just let it go. Let it go. Your soul, the best thing that you can do for your soul is just to let it go, because being creative is the food for your soul. It really is. And being able to finish it and being accomplished and getting over the hurdles of writer's block and pushing yourself forward into a completed story, it's infectious, it's contagious, because you're smiling and people are like, what are you so happy about? I finished my story. People radiate off that. If you're stuck, please don't stop writing. Don't stop. Figure out how to get past the hurdle, because it's only a hurdle.
Honestly, I think we should leave all of our listeners with that as the ending to this episode, because I don't think Ari or I could articulate that any better. So, Cory, thank you very much. This conversation has been enlightening, and I know like a lot of people know what writer's block is and have varying ways to get over it or not get over it, depending. I learned a lot of new things from this conversation as well. So I really appreciate it. And it's really been a pleasure to have you on the show. So before we go, would you like to share a little something about yourself with our listeners?
Absolutely. I've worked in the film industry for over 20 years. I'm a huge film geek, science fiction nerd, but I write nonfiction narratives, whether it be features or shorts. And my goal is to reach out to the human soul with a high concept plot, right? And so my goal as a writer is to continue to have the audience engaged in the material and eventually be made into a film. But having them feel something after they read it or they watch it and there's conversation after, that is something I want to experience, and I have experienced, and I want that for all of you. So feel free to reach out anytime.
That sounds amazing. Are there any links that you want to share?
So primarily is my Instagram. Look up The Real Cory Rowe, and that's spelled CoryRowe. The Real Cory Rowe on Instagram. And if you have a question, don't hesitate to reach out, because one of the things I learned when I first started writing is I wish I had someone to answer my questions. If you have a question, don't hesitate to reach out, because I'll be more than happy to answer anything.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Cory. And all of Cory's links will be in the description below. So please do go check out his work. And in the meantime, we will turn it over to you guys. How do you overcome writer's block when you slam face first into that wall? Let us know your answers in the comments so we can chat about it. Remember, we release a new episode every Wednesday. Next week, we're discussing Book Spice. So to ensure you don't miss that, hit the subscribe button on your way out. As always, thanks for listening to the Merry Writer Podcast. We'll see you guys next week. This podcast is brought to you by Sticky Notes. Our walls are covered. The music titled Inspired is by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons 4.0.